we have a new month coming up. It's May. That's what's coming up. I'm Don Stradley. This is Dana Hersey. We're the Film Detective, America's favorite streaming platform. In May, we're going to be celebrating a couple of birthdays. Let me look it up. I think it's May 26th is John Wayne.
Yep.
And the day after is Vincent Price. Can you imagine two more different characters being born so close together?
Yeah. Very different men, too.
Yeah.
Very different kinds of men, too, actually. But the Duke, I mean, I named my dog Duke, you know.
Really?
Because, yeah, his original name was Pronto. He's about a 28-pound rescue dog, you know. He's cute as hell. He's a great dog. And but when he was a puppy, he was only about this big. He'd just been weaned. And we were up at the island. And I was swimming in the island. My wife brought him to the beach. And just he was that big, you know. And we had named him Pronto because he came to us very quickly. But my wife got to the water's edge and he jumped out of her arms and started swimming toward me. Only when he was about this far. I said, "You're not a Pronto, you're a Duke." You know, Duke he picked that name for himself.
Did he?
John Wayne, actually, nobody gave that name to John Wayne. John Wayne picked it himself because, of course, his real name was Marion.
Right.
And, you know, in fact, somebody asked him one time whether or not he fought as a kid. And he turned to them and he said, "My name is Marion Morrison. You think I fought as a kid? Yeah, I fought as a kid." So he had to defend himself all the time, but he hated that name. And so when he was a very young kid, he took the name Duke, and it was actually the name of the family dog. And the family actually would call him Little Duke, would call the dog Big Duke, and would call him Little Duke. And it stuck for his entire career because he used to tell people to call him the Duke. I mean, some people always think that was put on him by the press or put on him by somebody who worked with it. But he actually picked that when he was a small kid because he didn't like his full name. An amazing individual, actually, and he really was. I mean, there are very few actors that you could name that have reached that kind of iconic status. And I know today there's a lot of criticism of John Wayne because of, you know, his conservatism. But you know something, he was a giant movie star. He was a movie star of a caliber that very few actors have ever achieved. He starred in 142 movies. That's a record that probably will stand forever. I know Bruce Willis, until he had his medical problem, was headed that way, but John Wayne starred in 142 movies as the star of the movie. That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's interesting about John Wayne too, and there were some other actors you could certainly say this about. Was, you know, I believe he started really in silent films. He was an extra in a handful of silent films, and he really followed the entire history of movie making, from sound films, then from black and white into color films. And then by the 60s, he was appearing in all of those big, you know, censor-round type films that were being sold to the public, you know, and
then he did a little television. Yeah.
Yeah, the movies became increasingly more violent, and he was certainly involved in some of that, you know. Gunplay started to look more realistic by his later films. And he really did run the gamut from the early days of movies to the 70s.
Right.
And from John Ford all the way up to, you know, working with, in his last film, Ron Howard was the kid in The Shootist.
Right.
My favorite John Wayne story was when he was making Stagecoach. And he'd already been in the business a while. He'd been in a lot of, you know, the small studio pictures. And when he went into the production of Stagecoach, he started giving John Ford advice as far as setting up a shot. He would say, "Well, you know, when we were shooting at Monogram, we would do it this way." And John Ford was looking at him. And so John Ford, I think he may have had one of the old megaphones that directors used. And he said, "Hey, everybody, apparently John Wayne thinks he knows everything, and he thinks we're a bunch of idiots. So I'm going to let him direct the picture." And from then on, John Wayne just kind of backed off.
Yeah.
Didn't say another
And
word.
they became
Always
great
deferred.
friends, of course.
And
Yeah,
they did
and they
become
became
great
great
friends
friends.
and
They
a great
became great friends.
team.
You know, it's amazing when you consider that man never really intended to become an actor. I mean, he literally are one of those actors, successful actors that fell into the motion pictures. I mean, he went to school at USC on a football scholarship, and he literally got injured body surfing. You know, as all the kids out there, they spend a lot of time in the ocean, and you know, the big hit out there was body surfing, the big thing that everybody did, and he hurt his shoulder. As a result of that, he couldn't play football anymore. And so they took his football scholarship away, and he could no longer afford to stay at USC. So he dropped out of USC, and one of his old football coaches got him a job at Warner Brothers as a prop guy. Just one of these, you know, which is a big deal in those days because, you know, like it is today, it's very hard to get in to the movie business. But this football coach knew somebody and said, this kid needs a break. And, you know, he was a good looking guy. He was 6'3", you know, and they put him on board. And eventually somebody decided you belong in front of the camera, not behind the camera. But, you know, for a guy that starred in 142 pictures, that's a pretty amazing beginning.
Well, he certainly looked the part. That was something you could never take away from him. He looked the part, you know. In fact, he was so good at those kind of big outdoorsy characters that I never fully believed him when he was in modern dress. Like in some of his later movies, he'd be wearing a suit and a fedora, and I thought, no, he belongs outdoors. You know, he's a horseman. You know, he doesn't belong in an office or a cop car or something.
Well, he's certainly known for his cowboy films. He turned down a lot of roles because he didn't like the way the role was heading. I think he turned down High Noon, in fact.
Yeah,
they wanted him to be in High Noon,
that's
but
true.
he didn't like the way he felt the story was too un-American, believe it or not. It's hard to believe that story is un-American, but that's the way he felt anyway. And the only role that I know of that he wanted and he never got was Dirty Harry. That he literally wanted Dirty Harry, but he was 62 years old. And they thought he was too old to do it. And they gave it to Clint Eastwood, and the rest is history, as they say.
I also heard that Sinatra was considered for Dirty Harry, and Elvis.
Elvis, I had not heard. Is that right?
Yeah.
Elvis for Dirty Harry?
Yeah.
I don't see that actually.
Well, I think Elvis owned a 44 Magnum. I think that was that was the reason.
Right. Maybe.
But you know, Elvis still had a lot of clout. But I think he had already stopped making movies, and he was already back in Las Vegas performing on stage. But yeah, I heard Elvis, I heard Sinatra, I heard John Wayne. So Clint wasn't the first one in line, but
no, that's for sure. But I think it's interesting that a guy with the kind of clout that John Wayne had, they thought he was too old for the role and never gave him the role. That's the only one that I know that he wanted that nobody ever gave him. Because he turned down a lot of roles that became quite famous roles. One of my favorite stories about John Wayne is the story that's going around now that he used to tell actually to his friends. He had a very small circle of friends, but he used to tell this story. And apparently the story is now well documented, and that he survived not one, but 2 assassination attempts from the KGB, because Joseph Stalin had fingered him as this rampant anti-communist, and he wanted to do away with him. And you know, a lot of people say that's baloney, but apparently Nikita Khrushchev actually confirmed that story and said that he was the one that pulled the death assassination attempt, you know, the death warrant on John Wayne. I thought that was incredible. And how exactly he avoided those assassination attempts is a little vague, but nevertheless, it's an interesting story.
Did his politics ever come into conversation with you and your movie-going pals back in the day when he was becoming such a right-wing figurehead?
No, I think a lot of people give him a break now. I mean, I think most people do,
Yeah,
give him a break. But as you know, there's been a recent attempt to cancel him, as
right.
if the guy's been dead now for 30 years and they want to cancel him. I don't really understand that. But over 30, I guess, 1979, he
Yeah.
died. So, yeah. And you got to give the guy a lot of credit for just survivability, too. He had lung cancer. They took out most of one of his lungs. He went right back to work. He was at work 2 months later. And actually, I think it was Henry Hathaway that he was working with, and he had cancer as well. And Hathaway didn't baby him, and he always said, "That's the reason I think that I continued making movies, is because this director had cancer as well, and he made me do all the same things he would have done if I hadn't just had a lung removed." He said, so I kept on making motion pictures, and tough motion pictures, pictures that were physically difficult to do, and then, of course, I got stomach cancer, and then there was another. The closest I ever really came to John Wayne, because he did die in 1979, was I was on his boat once. I was on his, it's called a Wild Goose, and it's still out there. It was a minesweeper in World War II, and he had converted it into a yacht. And I interviewed, believe it or not, I interviewed Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau on that boat when it was in, wasn't Santa Monica, but it was in Newport Beach, I think. And it was a kick actually to be in there. They showed you the card room, and they showed, he was a big chess guy. He loved playing chess, and he was actually very good at it. And there was a screenwriter that was a good friend of his, said that he played chess with him for 20 years and never won a game. So he was very good at that, actually. So he was a lot deeper than a lot of people thought he was.
Yeah, I was always surprised when, of course, when I was a kid and watching his movies, I just sort of took him for granted. But then as I got a little older, and I was always surprised when I met people who didn't like him because of his politics. I was naive, and I thought, well, he's a guy on TV. What difference does it make?
Right.
That was my way of looking at it. But a lot of people took it very seriously, and
Well, you got to. I mean, he eulogized Nixon.
yeah,
He gave Nixon's eulogy. He was a big fan of Ronald Reagan's, and he was involved in Ronald Reagan's campaign. So a lot of people that don't happen to be Republicans and conservatives, they don't like the guy for that reason. But if you just were to judge the guy on, how honest and American he was, and for his acting and his movies, I should say, I mean, there's nobody better. I mean, he really was an American.
Do you have a favorite John Wayne movie?
Yeah, I do. I think The Quiet Man is, I think, the best film that he ever made.
Yeah.
He liked that movie as well himself, but that was not his favorite movie. He loved Stagecoach because it was the movie that propelled him, his career. But he also, I mean, he used to say this all the time. He used to say Hatari was like his favorite movie. And that is a movie that was not critically well received at all. But I think it had a lot to do with the fact that he spent 3 or 4 months literally on safari in order to make that movie. And I don't know, he just liked being out there, I guess.
It has a great soundtrack. It's
Yes,
got the
it
Henry
does.
Mancini soundtrack.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful album if you ever like soundtracks.
But you know what I mean? It is not a movie that critics actually liked at all when it came out. I'm not even so sure it was a very successful movie. I might be wrong about that, but as I remember, it was not that successful.
Yeah, I don't think it was one of his blockbusters. My favorite is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
That's a good movie.
Yeah, I really like that one. I think he's a little different in that one. A little more grizzled, a little more problematic. Kind of a interesting character, and it's a great story too.
It's one of my to watch again films. I have a number of these movies that to watch again. They're all on my list, and that's
and it's funny how some of them get better as time goes on. That's
and some of them don't.
Some of them do not.
Yeah, some of them don't. No.
Yeah. Some of them are best left in the past. But Liberty Valance, I watch that every few years just to refresh it, and it always holds up. Now, Vincent Price, born the next day, and we're going to be showing a bunch of, well, for John Wayne, we'll probably be showing Angel and the Bad Man, which was a great one. One that he produced, by the way. And also probably McClintock, and maybe some of the older titles we have. We have a bunch of those old Lone Star Westerns that he did prior to Stagecoach.
Those are
For
all great
Vincent
films.
Price, we're going to show House on Haunted Hill.
Yep.
The Bat, which is a great one. Agnes Moorehead is in that one. And what I think is one of Vincent Price's best movies, The Last Man on Earth, which was based on an old Richard Matheson novel that has been made a bunch of times as a movie. It seemed like every 10 years someone would try to make it. It was done as The Omega Man at one point with Charlton Heston. But The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, I think that was the first time that this novel was made into a film. You know, Vincent Price, as different as he is from John Wayne, he's almost the anti-John Wayne. As I was thinking about them today, getting ready to talk to you, I was thinking they did have something in common, Wayne and Vincent Price, in that neither one of them played modern roles. They were almost always playing roles from the past, you know. I mean, John Wayne did some World War II movies and whatnot. That was about as close to the modern era as he got. But Vincent Price was always in some kind of a costume, always in a castle somewhere.
He had an explanation for that, you know. He said because when we came up, again, it was on the peripheral of the silent era as it was coming up, that we were theater actors, that we were trained as theater actors. And so we were trained to project. I mean, it was all about the voice. And it was all about, and that's why so few theater actors actually transitioned into the talkies, because they didn't have a powerful enough voice, or their voice didn't match the characters that they played. Yet he said, when you came up like that, and then suddenly you're thrust into the late 50s and the early 60s of making movies, and suddenly there's this Stanislavski method. Suddenly there are method actors like, you know, Marlon Brando coming out, you know, like James Dean coming out. And as he put it, and you know, they're kind of mumbling all over the place, and they're, you know, they're doing this and that. He said actors that could project, and actors who had, like himself, that had kind of perfect enunciation and were very articulate. You know, those actors were relegated, he said, specifically to costume dramas. He said a lot of us had to do things in costume as a result of that, either, you know, classic kinds of filmmaking, or, you know, or these costume characters. And that's exactly how he got to be actually this, you know, the horror master that he actually became, or accepted so many of these roles. He had a great line about villains too. I'll never forget. He said that villains are far more sympathetic than heroes are in a black-white, you know, evil versus good movie. And if you think about it, it's true, because he said the villain was always a guy who had been wronged, and there was a reason why. I mean, he was bullied as a kid, or he was, you know, orphaned, had a terrible upbringing, or he was, you know, he was in one way or another abused, or he had some deformity or something. So there was something about him that people actually could identify with and could sympathize with. He said, well, the hero was normally a good-looking guy who kind of had everything, you know, went through life without, you know, he was far less sympathetic than a villain. And I had never thought about that until I heard him say that. And that's exactly true when you think about it.
Well, I remember a lot of those villains that he played, and also Boris Karloff and people, actors of that nature. At the end, when they were destroyed, they always sort of went up in flames, and it was agony, and it was really kind of tragic to see them, you know, in their death throes. You know, I always felt bad for the monster when he burned up at the end of Frankenstein.
Right.
You
Frankenstein, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, he and Karloff were actually very good friends. I mean, they were very, very good friends. And he said the thing that people don't know about Boris Karloff is he was a very funny man. and that the two of them would empty restaurants out, he said, because we would just be howling at these restaurants, you know, talking about life and telling jokes back and forth. He said he was a very funny guy. And that is something you don't really think about when you think of Boris Karloff. But the two of them, two of the master villains of film, you know, having a good time, yucking it up in some restaurant and, you know, making people leave because they're being too noisy. It's pretty funny.
They were too rowdy.
Too
There was
rowdy,
a
yeah.
funny story about Vincent Price. This was long after Karloff had died. And this woman approached Vincent Price out in public somewhere and said, Mr. Karloff, I've always been a fan of yours and I would love your autograph. So rather than tell this woman, hey, I'm Vincent Price, he just signed her autograph book, Boris Karloff. And Boris had been dead for a few years already. So he always wondered if that woman said, hey, I got Boris Karloff's autograph today. And
well,
her
you know,
friends
it's
would
funny.
say, he died, Maud, or, you know.
Yeah.
Well, he was
know,
also
they used
good
to say
friends with Christopher Lee. I think all of those guys were, you know,
They
all
were
worked
actually,
together. They all
They used to show up at these wax museums. They used to do these bits at wax museums, at like Madame Tussauds or something, and they would, you know, they'd take the wax dummies of them off, and they'd put these guys in some pose, you know, and then when people walked by, they would have a knife and they would, like, you know, move. He said, and he just had the best time doing that kind of thing. And he and those two actually used to do that just for fun, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny about autographs too, that Vincent Price is one of those guys. There's a story about him that Helen Hayes, when he first started in the movies, Helen Hayes took him aside and said, look, you're not an actor unless you have fans. Then this is a public servant job. You're going to have to remember that although it's a pain in the neck, that these people are your audience, and you will never be a star. You'll never work a lot unless you're good to those people. And he, as a result, took that to heart, and he never turned down an autograph. His daughter, in fact, was talking one time about how, you know, she used to go out with him all the time. And of course, he would just be inundated with these people who wanted his autograph. And she said, I don't think he ever had a hot meal, that he would sit down at a restaurant, people would recognize him, and then they started lining up for his autograph. And he said, he never said, let me finish my meal. He never said, no, he was always not only signing autographs, but asking, you know, where they were from, you know, how many kids they had. I mean, he was a very engaging, a wonderful man. And if you ever see any tape of him now on any of these shows like the Carson Show, he's incredibly personable. He's a very nice man. And it's funny, it's that juxtaposition between this villain that he used to play all the time and a man who is genuinely a very nice and a very erudite man as well. You know how much he's an art collector. I mean, he collected.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote books about art. He wrote one of the most definitive books about American art, apparently, that there is. I have never read it. I've never seen it, actually, but he used to talk about it in terms of apparently he included in this book about American art a lot of ethnicities, a lot of Americans who came from other places. And he said, if you look at, you know, the expanse of American art, you can see these people who came from other places in the world all have developed a sense of America through their art, America through their painting and through their sculpture. They transmitted the who Americans actually were, instead of their own, where they came from. So a pretty interesting concept. And I've always wanted to get a hold of that book, actually, but I think it's pretty difficult to get a hold of. But I don't know if it's still in print or not.
I know that he also had a fairly big art collection that he had amassed over the years. And I think he donated all of it to a college in Los Angeles. They have a whole wing devoted to his art collection. And he was interesting. He would always encourage people, go out and buy a piece of art. You know, you'll feel better for it. You know,
Right.
You don't have to buy as much as I do, but go buy a piece. You know, go buy something. Have fun and appreciate it. He was very interested in that.
He bought a Vincent van Gogh etching when he was
Wow.
10 years old or 10 or 11 years old. and it was, everybody thought it was worth it, but it was just a a sketch thing, and they wanted $35 for it, and he only had $5, but he said, "I'll pay you for it later. I'll pay you over time." He said it took him 3.5 years to pay it back, but he did. He bought, that was the first piece of art that he ever bought. He was also a purveyor of art. He would buy art for other people, and he bought 55,000 pieces of art for not only himself, but for other people. An amazing guy. I mean, he really was a very bright guy. He was a Yale graduate too.
Yeah, and he was from St. Louis.
Right.
St. Louis, Missouri, and my father was from St. Louis, and I used to tease my father. I would say, "You're from St. Louis. Why can't you be more like Vincent Price?" Why?
Right.
And you can imagine the dirty look he'd give me. But I also I never got to see him on stage, but Vincent Price apparently did a lot of plays. He did a one-man show as Oscar Wilde, which was
he did that for a long time, actually. Yes, right.
yeah.
And he was amazing at that. The man had incredible recall, and Oscar Wilde, like the Wilde poetry, is difficult, I think, personally, to memorize, and yet he used to spout that off on stage at 100 miles an hour. It was just amazing what that man. He was a very, very bright guy, incredible guy.
And also, he could go from doing Oscar Wilde to Gilligan's Island or the Brady Bunch.
Yes.
Or the Muppets. I mean,
and seemed to love it all. He was these guys who was never bitter about anything. That it used to be said of him that he would do anything because he did a lot of this goofy stuff on television. But he said, I love doing it. I mean, he was on the Thriller album. I mean, remember that? Yeah.
And Edward Scissorhands, he had the very touching role as the scientist in that movie.
Yeah.
Well, he loved to work. And one of my favorite quotes from Vincent Price was someone asked him, "Did it ever bother you to be typecast?" And he said, "I'd rather be typecast than unemployed." And that says it all. That was his whole philosophy. Just keep working, whether it's the Brady Bunch or Oscar Wilde. Just keep doing it. Or Batman.
I know we have a number of his movies, as you mentioned, coming up. I think wasn't it Theater of Blood. That was his favorite film, because a lot of it was because he got to kill critics. He said in it.
Yeah, and he got to. I think he got to do a little bit of Shakespeare in that movie too.
That's true. Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And he would kill the critics in ways that he had seen in Shakespearean plays. I think that's what it was, right?
That's right. Yeah. Theater of Blood.
Diana Rigg was in that one too, as his little sidekick.
Yeah. Wow. God, she was a beautiful woman.
Yeah. She was something special, and she was another versatile actress who could do, the Avengers, and then do, a classic piece of theater. She was one of a kind. Actually, Christopher Lee's birthday, we're not celebrating it, but Christopher Lee's birthday is the same day as Vincent
We're
Price.
not celebrating it?
We're not. We're going to ignore it. Maybe
Just
next
John
year.
Wayne, right, and Vincent Price. But maybe next year, Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
Well, happy birthday to them all.
And finally, Anna May Wong. Her birthday is on the 17th.
Right.
She was a fascinating character. That's a Hollywood story right there.
It sure is. I mean, as a little girl, apparently, they used to make, she grew up in Los Angeles. And I think she was third generation. I mean, she was American through and through, but not that the second generation people aren't American as well. But she'd been here a long time, and her family had been here a long time. But she used to, as a child, go down. Her parents hated it. They were dead set against her getting involved in the movie business. But she used to go down when they were making movies in Chinatown, which they did quite frequently. And she would, get her way,
Skip school.
move her way into skip school to go see it. And then she said, I knew I would get a licking, or I knew I'd get whipped for it, but I didn't care. I was amazed by all these guys, that even the photographers and the producers and the directors and these wonderful actors in grease paint. So she became fascinated at a very young age with the movie business and decided that she wanted to be an actress. Now, of course, this is at a time when, usually Caucasians were the ones to play at least leading roles, to play Asians in movies. Paul Muni, remember in The Good Earth?
Yeah.
I mean, there were two Caucasians that played Charlie Chan.
I think Edward G. Robinson may have played some Asian
I think you're
characters.
right. You're right. But, also Mary Pickford, I think, played Madame Butterfly. I mean, it was only Caucasians, literally, that played Asian roles in movies for a very long time.
You would only see Asians as extras if they were filming a movie that took place in Chinatown or something.
That's true. And, speaking of Charlie Chan, his number one son and his number two, they were played by actual Asians in the movies. But she was the first one to come along and demand, certain roles, or that she wasn't going to take a lesser role. I mean, she lost parts as a result of demanding that she was going to. I think The Good Earth was one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, she wanted that role that Rainier eventually ended up with.
Yep.
And they offered her a secondary role as a character that was a bad girl. So that was the one that they were going to give her. And she said, that's the only bad girl in the movie, and I'm going to have to play it. The only Asian you have to play in the movie. So she turned that down and didn't do it. So she was pretty principled that way. And she was very open about the racism that she had encountered in the movies. And, she said something that was, it was very sad, but very funny at the same time. She said, all of these roles, I either played these roles where I was the submissive Oriental, the demure, submissive Oriental, or I would play, the dragon lady, the evil dragon lady. She said, either one, by the time the credits rolled, the final credits rolled, I'd be dead. I mean, they wouldn't know what to do with me. So, and something you think, oh, that's an exaggeration. But you look at her movies, it's true. It's absolutely true. And she claims it because they didn't really know what to do with my character. And so that's, what happened. But she deserved a lot of credit because she opened a lot of doors in Hollywood. And largely it was because of her insistence on playing, certain roles and saying she wouldn't play secondary roles. That's the role that she should play because she was an authentic Asian actress. And I think she opened a lot of doors.
There was, I wrote a short piece about Anna May Wong for the Film Detective's website last year. And as I was researching the story, I found one little tidbit that fascinated me. It was in an old newspaper from the early 40s. And she had left America for a while and she was doing plays in Europe, London, and she was a big success. She was doing very well. She came back to America.
Yes.
She came back because one of the studios promised her sort of a Mr. Moto type series where she would be a female detective action star. And she thought, well, that would be good. I'll be, Mr. Moto was played by Peter Lorre. Okay. And
yeah,
again,
right.
she thought, well, if you want to have a real Asian sleuth, solving crimes in Chinatown, that I would love to do it. And as a female,
sounds like a great premise, doesn't it?
It would be
like
great
a great
now.
Premise?
You could do it now. It would be beautiful.
Yeah.
And she came back, and then the series never got off the ground.
I think it aired. I think that series aired.
I think they did. It was going to be a movie series, like Mr. Moto. It was going to be, every few months they were going to release like a 70-minute feature.
It was a title like The Adventures of Lucy Sue, or I can't remember what it was. But
she did do a TV series later on in the 50s that was very short-lived.
But she was a detective in this one too. It
Yeah,
lasted only one season.
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, yeah.
And I think the film detective should get on this, because I don't believe anyone has ever found the film, or anyone has found any evidence of this series anywhere.
Yeah, a lot of that early television is, gone with the wind.
Yeah.
Nobody
Well,
knows
that's
where
true.
it is, or it's burned up.
Yeah.
But
Right.
she was great. She was also, another one who, when it seemed like the movies were not calling, she went into the new medium of film. I mean, television. She went into television and worked a fairly good amount in television in the 50s.
Yeah. It would be sometimes she wouldn't work for a while, but then she would pop back up in something. So I think it was enough to sustain her. But I mean, she never worked as much as probably she should have worked. That's for sure.
Yeah, there was a point in her career where things got so bad that she ended up just appearing at hotels, doing like a little one-woman show where she would, sing a couple of songs and literally put on, like a geisha girl outfit and serve tea to the customers between acts. It really
Yeah.
it reached that low
To make a
point
living.
where,
Yeah, right. Just to make a living.
in the middle of Nebraska, Anna May Wong would be appearing at, the Hilton,
Local.
um,
Yeah. Oh, dear.
and
Dear,
but
oh,
then,
dear.
she would always find a way back and appear in some, Europe was always welcoming to her. She could always return to
Yeah.
Europe and do something, but here in the States, she couldn't get it going.
Well, certainly a groundbreaker. And I think that's why she's on that women's series of, the Mint, the US Mint is doing quarters with women on
Oh,
them.
yeah.
And I'm ashamed to say that I can't remember the title of what, Women in the Quarters for Women or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but she's one of those women that's on the new quarters. So if you'd like to get a hold of an Anna May Wong quarter, get a hold of the US Mint. There you
Well,
go.
on the 17th, we'll be showing two of her movies. One of them is a Sherlock Holmes movie, A Study in Scarlet. And I think she plays another one of her mysterious dragon lady type characters in that one.
According to her, there are
but
only
we're-
two different kinds of roles.
we're also showing one of her later films from the World War II era called Lady from Chungking, which is a little different. She plays, I think she plays a school teacher who infiltrates enemy lines. I believe
During the Chinese invasion.
yeah.
I'm sorry, during the Japanese invasion of China.
Exactly.
Right.
And she's a school teacher who becomes a spy. And that was a good one. And that was one of the last ones she did for a while. After that, they were making promises that they didn't keep, and I couldn't figure
I
out
believe she
why
died.
they didn't keep the promises.
She died fairly young, I believe.
She did.
She died in her 50s, I think. Maybe
Yeah.
late 50s, somewhere.
Yeah, I think from what I read, I think she was drinking a lot.
Yeah.
And living by herself. Sometimes she had enough money.
She was never married. Apparently, she was never married.
No, I believe you're right. Yeah. And apparently she was either going to star in Flower Drum Song. They had a big role for Flower Drum
She was too
Song.
sick in order to play it. Yeah, right.
And she was ready to do it.
I do remember that.
She
Yeah.
died.
Right.
But yeah, Anna May Wong. And also, you got to admit, when she did some of those photo shoots for Vanity Fair at the time, and some of the movie star magazines, the woman knew how to strike a pose, just magnetic in front of a camera. They would dress her up in these really outlandish, 1930s Art Deco type costumes, and she could really
As
pose.
they were wont to do, yes.
Oh man,
Yeah.
She knew how to catch the light. She really knew how to do it. And the photographers she worked with, who I'm sure were a lot of German expats who had left Europe
Right.
and were working here, They just thought she was the
When is the
perfect-
lady from excuse me, when is the lady from Chungking going to be on? Do we have it
the
scheduled?
17th.
And it's
May
17th of next month. Oh,
Yeah.
17th of May, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tuesday.
17th of this month, right.
And
Yeah,
also,
right.
you know, the Film Detective also has the on-demand service. So I think, I believe after it plays on the 17th, you can look for it on demand on the Film
Yeah.
Detective. And
I'm gonna watch that movie.
yeah, it's pretty interesting to see what kind of career she might have had. Because you know, it's not a dragon lady, it's not a submissive little character. You know, she's sort of that action type of character.
But does she live until the final credits roll? We shall see.
I believe she does, but she doesn't come to a good end.
Oh, don't give it up now. Don't spoil it.
All's fair in love and war.
Right.
Well, we've been yakking for about 45 minutes. I'm going to pick one day out of the month and recommend it. Something I thought would be fun to do. The 22nd, we're showing two movies that I'll recommend to the viewers. One of them is Palooka.
Boxing and dames never mix. That seems to be the message of Palooka, a movie based on the popular Joe Palooka comic strip of the 1930s. Jimmy Durante stars as Nobby Walsh, the trainer of boxing contender Joe Palooka. Nobby guides Joe to the top, but can a simple-minded boxer survive life in the fast lane? Stuart Irwin stars as Joe, and fresh from his role in King Kong, Robert Armstrong stars as Joe's father, Pete Palooka. You'll also see a trio of beautiful actresses, Thelma Todd, Mary Carlisle, and the Mexican Spitfire herself, Lupe Velez. As usual, Lupe steals every scene she's in. From 1934, directed by Benjamin Stoloff, here's Palooka,
which stars Jimmy Durante. It's based on the old Joe Palooka cartoon strip. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that one, but it was a comedy about a boxer.
I am. Yeah, I know. Well, that makes sense that you would like that. You write books about boxers.
Well, sure. But Palooka also stars the old Mexican Spitfire.
That is. I can't believe I can't remember her name. Oh, I can't believe I can't remember her name. Velez, right?
Yeah. Lupe Velez.
Lupe Velez, right.
And Lupe steals the show. She even steals the show from Jimmy Durante. And so I'd recommend that one. And on the same day, we're also showing one of Buster Keaton's talkies, Parlor, Bedroom, and Bath. Now, a lot of people don't like Buster's talkies. They think they're inferior to his silent movies. And they're probably right, but I think that's a pretty good one. And also, because the talkies were such a novelty, I think a lot of people don't realize that his talkies were big money makers. So his forgettable talkies made a lot more money for the studio than all the silent films that we've grown to treasure over the years. His talkies were big hits for a few years back in the early 30s. And if you're going to watch one Buster Keaton talkie, I'd recommend that one. So that's my recommendation for the month of May.
Well, good for you. Next time, maybe I'll have a recommendation for you.
All right. Well, it's been another fun afternoon talking with my friend Dana Hersey. I'm Don Stradley. Dana, if you would please sign us out.
For the Film Detective and Don, I'm Dana Hersey.
Thanks a lot, Dana. See you next month.
Thanks, pal.